I got myself a microphone on my head. I got a podium in front of me, and I got y'all for 30 minutes or so. I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I think we'll just get the ball started by, I guess I'll just tell you about my vacation. We'll do that to start with. Well, September last year, Charisse and I and Gary and Julie Shank, we flew into Ohio. We rented a car for 10 days, and we were going to take those 10 days and see all there is to see between Ohio and Atlanta, Georgia. It was on Interstate 65 en route to Nashville where we first experienced a Buc-ee's billboard. Who here knows about Buc-ee's? Okay, I know who I'm talking to now. Okay, well, if you've been to Buc-ee's, a billboard probably led you there. As one of those travelers, as one who doesn't travel much myself, I've never experienced Buc-ee's or their extensive billboard campaign. Buc-ee's signs are visually simple: a large cartoon beaver in the upper left corner, big yellow block lettering displaying a humorous statement, followed by how many miles to Buc-ee's. Here's a few examples of Buc-ee's billboards. Buc-ee's, 970 miles behind you, take your next U-turn. Buc-ee's, only 262 miles, you can hold it. Buc-ee's, where overbites are sexy, 256 miles. There's even one Buc-ee's billboard sign installed completely upside down. They really do want to get your attention. Buc-ee's accomplished their objective with these signs. They captivated our attention. Then they pointed us to a destination. Signs always point to a destination, and that destination is always greater than the sign itself. Now, this destination was the world's largest gas station. 120 fuel pumps, 250-foot-long car wash, convenience store sprawling over 84,000 square feet. Every year, Buc-ee earns the titles of the cleanest gas station restrooms in the country, boasting of 83 sparkly clean toilets. As food is concerned, Buc-ee's has 8-time world barbecue champion Randy Pauly as their director of barbecue. In addition to barbecue, a fully operating deli, an in-house bakery, a giant taco burrito counter, and the most extensive coffee bar you've ever seen. Shopping for souvenirs and supplies might best be described as Hobby Lobby, Bass Pro Shop, and AutoZone, all in one experience. Little did we know, a cartoon beaver on a billboard would capture our attention and point us to actually the most memorable part of our vacation, a gas station visit where we met Buc-ee. Okay, let's get into it. As you can see by Melissa's reading of the scriptures this morning, we are continuing through the Gospel of John. So before we get started, let's revisit the motivation behind the writing of this great gospel. Jesus posed a question to his disciples where he asked, "Who do you say I am?" Peter jumped up and answered, "The Christ of God." By believing Jesus as the Christ of God, Peter acknowledged that he was the fulfillment of God's promise to send the Messiah to rescue the world from its sin and the deadly consequences of sin. It wasn't long after the resurrection of Jesus that John, along with his fellow apostles, already started witnessing false teachings about Jesus. Those who did not have a firm belief in his deity were being led astray. Now today, over 2,000 years later, we continue to see this pattern of false gospels flourishing due to a misunderstanding of who Jesus is. A Legionnaire study conducted in 2022 found that 40% of U.S. evangelicals, that's us, we are U.S. evangelicals. That's kind of who we are. 40% of us thought Jesus was a good moral teacher, but he was not the Christ of God. He held no deity. He was just the rabbi. There was and there is a misunderstanding amongst many people who call themselves Christians as to who Jesus really is. John clearly explains his purpose in writing this gospel in chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, where he writes, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." One of John's tactics in building belief was to share wonders and healings performed by Jesus. And instead of calling these amazements miracles, John chose to call them signs. Jesus captivated people's attention by revealing his power and glory through these signs. Then he pointed them to a life in his name. And of all the many signs left by Jesus, John selected only seven special signs to share with us here in this gospel. The first sign that we encountered in this journey was Jesus turning water into wine at the wedding in Cana. The second sign we came across was a long-distance healing of a royal officer's son. Hopefully you learned of this sign from last week's homework in the handout. And today, placed before us, we are introduced to our third sign. As Melissa read, we are in chapter 5, verses 1 through 15. Now, verses 1 and 2 set the stage in Jerusalem. The city bustling as Jewish males over the age 21 would have been in attendance for one of the 3 Jewish festivals. Were directed to the pool of Bethesda for this third sign. Bethesda meaning place of mercy. The landmark used to describe the location of this pool was the Sheep Gate, which is found on the northeastern part of the wall surrounding the city. John also gives physical characteristics of this pool. He describes it as having 5 shade porches in its surround where people could gather. I'm giving you details there, not trying to get off into the weeds here, but interestingly enough, before the 19th century, no evidence of the pool of Bethesda could be found. It was known the exact location of that sheep gate, but no pool was found near that location. And with no evidence of a pool near the sheep gate, John's credibility was questioned. Scholars argued this passage, if not the whole Gospel of John, might have been written by someone who has never even been to Jerusalem. Some even campaigned to remove the Gospel of John from the New Testament canon. Well, fortunately, that campaign failed, and not too long ago, in 1888, Konrad Scheck, a German archaeologist, discovered the Pool of Bethesda, right where John recorded it to be. This discovery is a great example of how archaeology serves as a valuable tool in providing evidence that supports historical and cultural context of the Bible. So if you'd like to learn a little more about biblical archaeology, I have a YouTube channel for you to follow. Expedition Bible. You get home, look up Expedition Bible. Joel Kramer, a research professor of biblical archaeology, takes you right into the Bible by showcasing many of the biblical sites that you have read and learned about. Gotta get some water here. Okay, here we go. Now with verses 1 and 2 setting the stage, verse 3 describes those whom are on that stage. It explains there is a multitude, that means a whole bunch of people, invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed crowded around this pool. Brings us to verse 4. If you were reading along in your Bible as Melissa read our passage this morning, you may have noticed verse 4 is missing. 1 and 2 set the stage. Verse 3 tells us who's on the stage. And verse 4, it's just not there. Well, here's an explanation. This verse is not found in the earliest and most reliable manuscripts of the Gospel of John. Textual critics suggest that John chapter 5, verse 4 might have originated as a marginal note that was added into the text to explain why multitudes of people would gather around this pool. Even though verse 4 likely not part of the original text, the verse reveals the beliefs and practices of the time, highlighting the importance of this pool. So as I come to verse 4 in my Bible, I'm referred to a footnote, and that footnote states, it was their belief that an angel would come down at a certain season into the pool, stirring up the water. The first one in the pool after stirring of the water would be healed of whatever disease they had. So we found from this footnote, multitudes of people were gathered at this pool for the purpose of healing. And given the size of this pool, now get this is a big pool. This pool is 393 feet long by 164 feet wide. Given that size, it said that there could have been up to 3,000 invalids struggling to get as near to the pool's edge as possible. Really, a hospital. There's no doctors, no nurses, no rooms, no beds, no equipment, no medication, just sick people piled upon one another. Can you visualize that scene? Imagine wailing, odors, certainly desperation. Well, it's the midst of that scene enters Jesus, his attention drawn to one particular man. This man's been incapacitated by his ailment for 38 years. Most likely he was paralyzed, little to no use of his legs. Verse 6 tells us Jesus saw him and knew that he had been there a long time. Jesus saw him and knew him. How did Jesus know that this man's been there a long time? Well, just as he knew the life story of the Samaritan woman at the well, as we learned last week. You see, the Creator knows the creation. He knows things. Jesus knew this man. He knew his condition. He knew his history. He knew his heart, and he certainly knew his sin, just as he sees you, and he knows you. You know, we've been hanging out here at Mountain View Church for quite a while now together. And I must say, I'm quite fond of y'all. I am. I can confidently say that I love the individuals that make up this church family. I really do. To the level that I know you, I find you easy to love. I believe also you're fond of me. I might have stepped out of bounds on that one, but we'll see. Yet if we were to know one another as Jesus knows us, if we could hear one another's thoughts and know one another's motives, I believe our relationship would be strained. Actually, I'm sure we would find one another a bit intolerable. Now, we pull it off pretty good on the outside, don't we? But the inside is where the truth lies. It's easy to do the right things for the wrong reason, but Jesus always knows our reasons. Here's the good news and how that makes you feel. The truth is his love for you isn't dependent upon you. His love for you isn't dependent upon your ugly thoughts. His love for you is dependent upon who he is, not who you are. Romans 5:8, Paul puts it this way. But God shows his love for us in what? God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. He knows you and he loves you in spite of your sin. It is in accepting his love for you in the midst of your sin where he changes you. and makes a new creation. Take comfort in the fact that you are fully known and you are fully loved by him. Now, in verse 6, Jesus, fully knowing and fully loving this man by the pool, approaches him with a question of compassion. As the paralyzed man was focused on the water, waiting for his opportunity, for his miraculous healing, he hears the voice of a stranger. Do you want to be healed? Well, that seems like a peculiar question to be asking in a setting such as this. Jesus' questions often seem a bit peculiar at first. They linger. They leave one thinking. Often they have multiple meanings. His question here is not only pertaining to you want to be physically healed, later we learn. It's also directed to a deeper healing. Do you want to be spiritually healed? The truth is, many people do not want to be healed. They may be hurt and they want to remain bitter. They don't want to forgive. They find purpose in holding a grudge. They don't want to be healed. Some people like viewing inappropriate videos. No one will know. It's not hurting anybody. They crave those images. They don't want to be healed. Some people choose to remain in their sin. Their sin is familiar. Their sin is comfortable. Their sin is what they know, and their sin is who they have become. They don't want to be healed. When Jesus asks this man, do you want to be healed? He replies in verse 7. Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm going, another steps down before me. In other words, yes, I want to be healed. But this is not working. I keep showing up. I position myself as close to the pool's edge as possible. I focus on the surface of the water and I wait. And I wait. When I see the water stir, I need help getting in. No one will help me. This is not working. You see, that is a statement of lost hope. He has no hope. And what kind of hope did he have in the first place? Webster's dictionary defines the word hope as a desire of something good, accompanied with at least a slight expectation of obtaining it. Wow, that's weak. That is a weak word, isn't it? Sounds more like hopelessness than it does hope. Yet that is the hope this man and all the others around this pool were leaning on. Maybe I'll be healed today, but probably not. Maybe, but probably not. In contrast, there is the hope we find in the Bible. In the Bible, hope is not just wishful thinking. It's not just maybe. In the Bible, hope is a strong expectation and assurance based on God's promises and trustworthy. A strong confidence that God is who he says he is, and he does what he says he will do. These people crowd around this pool. What was that? These people crowded around this pool are desperate in their brokenness. And they are leaning on the wrong hope. They are leaning on a false hope. Their hope leads to hopelessness, and yet this suffering without hope is an absolutely terrifying place to be. Paul writes in chapter 15, verse 13, and I find much encouragement in this verse. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope. With your confidence set on God, the Holy Spirit will strengthen you and you will abound in hope. This world is broken, we are broken, you are broken. That's why affliction and suffering are a part of our existence. We can't get out of that. I do find comfort in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17 and 18. For this light momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond comparison. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, temporary, but the things that are unseen are eternal. In this statement, you are being invited into a bigger picture as you inevitably endure your suffering. You're being invited into an eternal perspective as you experience your affliction. You're being invited into a life of hope in Him that will carry you through your darkest valleys. Hope. Hope got my friend Neil through his journey of suffering. Neil manages a maintenance machinist shop in the neighborhood where I once worked. Neil, he's a real man's man. He loves working on classic cars, bringing them to perfection. He enjoys the outdoors through hunting and fishing. But Neil's real passion is sharing the love of Jesus. Each Wednesday at noon in his maintenance shop, he would lead a Bible study. All were invited. You see, Neil chose to glorify God in his everyday life. And it is in that daily relationship with Christ that Neil's hope in the Lord developed. His hope developed, preparing him for whatever may come his way. Well, I'll never forget the day Neil came to me. He explained, I found a lump on my body where a lump does not belong. A biopsy was taken, lab work was conducted, and the diagnosis hit hard. Neil, a young family man, had a very rare and aggressive form of cancer. This is what I remember Neil saying to me. He doesn't remember saying this, but believe me, I remember him saying this. He says, Randy, I have no idea what's in store for me. I'm scared. I am scared, but this I do know. God is in control, and I pray that He will be glorified through my journey. You see, Nils had hope. He knew he would be healed. If healed instantaneously, and believe me, that's what we were praying for, if healed instantaneously, God would be glorified through it. If healed through a timely process, God would be glorified through it. And if the Lord ultimately healed Neil by ushering him through the gates of heaven, God would be glorified through it. Well, the next year did bring a tremendous amount of suffering to my friend. The side effects of radiation treatment, chemotherapy, and stem cell transplant brought this big, strong man to the edge of his physical death. Yet through his suffering, Neil held true to the original statement that God would be glorified through his journey. He invited countless numbers of nurses and doctors to pray with him as he prayed for their salvation. When he had the energy, he would post a God-glorifying comment on his social media, and towards the end of there, he didn't have much energy. Neil's suffering was not a roadblock. Neil's suffering was an avenue to knowing God in a much deeper way than he could have ever imagined knowing God. Kevin Huggins shares his insight about suffering in his book, Friendship Counseling, where he wrote, The high duties he gives us in the midst of our suffering empower us to transform otherwise senseless tragedies into the most sacred and significant assignments of our lives in our suffering. In Neil's darkest valley, through hope, he shared the love of Jesus as that was his most significant assignment of his life. Neil truly suffered for Christ. Praise God. Neil's good. Neil's healthy. He's doing fine. And now, transformed by his suffering, he brings a heightened level of empathy and compassion as he continues to share the love of Jesus, all through the power of hope. Hope in him will carry you through your darkest valleys. So now we're going to return to the pool, where Jesus, upon hearing this man's hopelessness, tells him to do exactly what he could not do. Verse 8, Jesus tells this man, get up, take up your bed, and walk. Jesus' merciful command seemed impossible. Yet this crippled man took his eyes off that pool of hopelessness and focused his attention on Jesus' words. Often, when Jesus tells us to do something, it seems impossible. But please remember this, when he gives you a command, he will also give you the power to do it. At once, the man was healed. Instantaneously, his bones strengthened. Blood flowed, muscles grew, and he got up, taking his bed as he will not be returning to this place of hopelessness. Walking as he displayed his new independence, no more relying on others to carry him. He was healed. Not healed by his faith. He didn't even know who Jesus was. He was healed by Jesus' compassion alone. Now that's a beautiful healing. But now we're going to get into the politics of the healing. The people part's done. Now let's get into the rules. Now in verse 9, we're told this compassionate healing took place on the Sabbath. Jesus intentionally performed this healing on a Sabbath. He knew that healing on the Sabbath would agitate the religious leaders, resulting in a conflict needing to occur. Through this conflict, Jesus would clarify his teaching, expose hypocrisy, and claim his deity, which would ultimately place him upon that cross. It was no accident that this healing took place on the Sabbath. Verses 10 through 13, verses 10 through 15 shows the initial reaction to the Sabbath day healing from the religious leaders. Now the Pharisees, knowing this healer posed a threat to their religious system, began their investigation. They started by locating the man who was healed. They chastised him for carrying his bed on the Sabbath, as carrying anything on the Sabbath would break one of the 39 additional rules placed upon Sabbath keeping. Then they questioned him about his healing. Who is this man who healed you on the Sabbath? And where might we find this man? They inquired. Can you imagine the response this man might have given to these leaders, considering the glorious day of healing that he just experienced? Maybe it would be something like this. Well, here's the deal. I was at the pool, and this man came up to me and asked me if I wanted to be healed. Well, yes, I said, that's why I'm here at the pool. Then he tells me to get up. He tells me to take my bed. He tells me to walk. Now, I can't explain this, but after 38 years, I was able to get up. I gathered my bed and I walked after 38 years. So that's why I'm here carrying my bed, because the man who healed me told me to. Right after he healed me, he just slipped away. I don't know where he is. I don't know who he is. I'll tell you what I do know. He healed me. This man's had quite a day. It's amazing how religion sees rules in contrast to how Jesus sees people. We find in verse 14 that later the healed man and the healer did meet in the temple. They had a brief but critical conversation. First, Jesus acknowledged the man's healing by enthusiastically saying, "I see you are well." Jesus was happy for him. Then he headed straight into addressing this man's spiritual healing by saying, "Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." Worse than 38 years of paralyzed. Well, you see, being lame in this world is just a light momentary affliction in comparison to being eternally separated from God. Jesus captured this man's attention with a physical healing. Then he pointed him to something much greater, his spiritual healing. A healing that would allow him to be in eternal fellowship with God, not separation. John didn't indicate in his writing whether this man turned from his sin or not. We have no idea. Actually, the highlight of this story isn't really about this man. The highlight of this story is about the healer, Jesus, and how he revealed his deity through this sign so that you and I may believe. Verse 15 ends today's story with the healed man reporting back to the Pharisees, informing them, "Hey, the man who healed me today, the man who healed me, it was Jesus. Jesus is the man who healed me today." And with that, the stage is set for next week's message, where Jesus and the religious system collide. So in closing, I have 3 points I hope you carry with you beyond today. 1, he knows you and he loves you in spite of your sin. Actually, he died for you because of your sin. Hope in him will carry you through your darkest valleys. Neil showed us the power of hope. Jesus poses the question, do you want to be healed? Maybe today is the day that you're ready to answer Jesus' question by saying, "Oh yeah, I'm broken. I admit it. I do want to be healed." If that is true for you, please share that with one of your pastors or one of your elders. We want to hear your story and we want to pray with you. We want to support you with your healing as you enter into a life in his name.